Kari here. Got Jenn with me. We are excited to be back for season 3. We were just having a little moment to celebrate just this podcast being around for 2 whole seasons now. We hope you had a good holiday season with your family, with your friends, and just hopefully had some downtime to sit with the Lord to just renew this season. I love this winter season, really, just to focus on renewing, refreshing our mind, just recentering. So we hope that you had time to do that, made a priority to do that. So we are kicking off season 3 with this episode. We're excited to start a brand new series all about barriers to healing. And this is something that I've learned more and more about over the years. And just as I kept digging, I realized that there are some very specific things that really enable our body to heal or impede it to heal, right? And so sometimes these things can also be seen as false root causes as well. And so that's actually how we wanted to start this series, because sometimes we can really go down rabbit holes. And I've seen that a lot, right? Like you have people that focus only on certain, thyroid or hormone or gut health and just kind of get more of that blinder effect, and you really miss the bigger picture. So we're hoping that this series really helps to just help you to think about healing in a different way. Of course, if you have been around with us for past seasons, you know that we talk a lot about this topic. And so we're excited to dig in more to what the barriers to healing that we've seen play the biggest roles are. And so, Jenn, do you want to kind of hop into the first false root cause that we have to talk about today and just kind of talk more about why these false root causes are really important to understand?
Sure. Yeah. So we identified, four false root causes that we really see um, in the people that we work with. Hormones, thyroid, adrenal, and genes. So a lot of people think that these are the root of their problems, but it's really a symptom and not the root. So hormones are very often blamed for a lot of people's issues, which is there a hormone issue? Absolutely. Sex hormones, adrenal hormones like cortisol and DHA. However, the root of the hormone issue is really a couple things. One, it's the receptor site sensitivity. So we all have these messengers called hormones that are released from the gland. And so if the docking site where the hormone goes to isn't sensitive or is blocked by a toxin, that messenger, i.e. the hormone, can't exert its effect, right? So we really have to look on receptor sites. We have to look at the actual gland itself. There's a good example, like if a package is delayed, do you blame the package or the mailing service? The package is the messenger, the gland is the mailing service. And so, the basically what happens is the gland is malfunctioning, right? And then there's also the idea that basically, we focus really on the sex hormones when really what we need to be looking at first is cortisol and melatonin, which relates back to the nervous system and how we stay in an activated stress response. That's probably the majority of our problem, is that we're in a constant stress response from the blue lights, from disrupted circadian rhythms, from toxins, from, you name it. There's lots of, that's what we're going to talk about this whole
Yeah.
series, are these stressors. So hormones are not the root cause. And so we really have to dig deeper with what's causing the hormone issues. And so if you think hormones are your main issue, we just want to challenge you to dig deeper. And the same for thyroid. Do you want to talk about thyroid, Kari?
Yeah. And I just think it's important to remember like the body doesn't make mistakes. So, even though we're saying like dig deeper, the gland, which is more so of what we're saying is the root of the issue, not necessarily the hormone, it's still doing what it's doing for a reason. So we're just going to hopefully shed some light on the why behind those things, and just the barriers, right, to the gland working properly, if that makes sense. So the adrenals and the thyroid are definitely very intricately connected. They sort of almost play off one another. And typically with the thyroid, it's really more of a conversion issue as far as, I mean, right, we have inactive thyroid that has to be converted to active thyroid. A lot of that happens in the liver. So typically, if you have low thyroid, or if your thyroid's off in a certain way, it's typically because there's a conversion issue, and or of course a stressor on the thyroid, which we will talk more about what those might be. And I think it's important though to, obviously we have to care for our thyroid. We want to like take the stressors off of it, but we can't only focus on the thyroid because it's just one piece of a bigger picture. And that's kind of what we're trying to help you to see today with the thyroids, with the genes, with the adrenals, hormones, all of those things.
Right. Everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
So everything is dependent on something else. Just like Kari said, the liver does a lot of the thyroid hormone conversion. And so if there's liver issues and you have a thyroid issue, you are going to see problems even fixing the thyroid until you
Yeah.
address the liver. So everything's interconnected. And so that's another reason why we're just calling your attention to how everything interrelates and is connected.
Yeah.
Which we hear a lot of things blamed on genes. And while genes expressed a certain way can create issues, it's not the genes themselves. So there's a concept or a study called epigenetics, which is how genes are expressed. And it basically states that their environment really dictates how that gene will be expressed. So what does that mean? That means that the actual genes or the SNPs, whether you're heterozygous or homozygous, meaning you have, two of the same from your parents, or you have one of each from each of your parents, it is really not the issue. It's really how these genes are expressed through something called methylation. So basically, there's enzymes and substrates made by your DNA that are actually inactive. And the process of turning on those enzyme substrates within the DNA is called methylation. And so that's really where the rubber hits the road
Mm.
is
Yeah.
methylation, how the DNA is methylated. So if it's common for people to have methylation issues. So probably
Yeah.
80 to 90% of people have some sort of methylation problem. And so if you are prone to things like chronic infections or mood disorders or mental health challenges, hypertension, migraines, addiction, chronic pain, overthinking, those are even autoimmune, autism,
Mhm.
those are really probably good indications that there's some sort of problem with methylation. And so the true issue is really how do we change the expression of those genes? So, toxicity will cause changes in how we express those genes because we have to methylate to detox. That's part of the detox process. And so,
Mhm.
if it's busy getting rid of all the toxicity, it's not doing its job of, methylating or taking care of the DNA. And so what happens is we have a deficiency will downregulate that methylation. And so, other things, mineral deficiency will cause changes, poor diet, nutritional deficiencies, because we need obviously certain things to fuel that methylation process.
Mhm.
So again, it's really a complicated subject. Genes can be, even your gut
Yeah.
microbiome directly affects gene expression. So the little bugs in your microbiome layer in your gut. A couple things that you can sort of tune into if you might have a methylation problem. One, and the most telling on blood work, is if you have a homocysteine above 6, there's definitely a methylation process.
Hmm.
Because normally we would methylate that homocysteine back into what's called methionine, which isn't an issue. If your uric acid is chronically high, so above 5.5 for females or above 6 in males, that could be a methylation problem. That could be other things too, but it could be a
Yeah.
methylation. Or if you stick out your tongue and you have a big crack down the middle, that probably means you don't methylate well. And then obviously you could do a gene test, but
Yeah.
those are just a couple things that you could do that are fairly inexpensive.
Yeah. That's a big subject.
It is a big subject, but
And
I just want to, reiterate that, if you have, so some people, they have a history of breast cancer and they have the brassica gene. That does not mean that it will be expressed. So,
yeah.
so the brassica, 5% of the people have that gene get cancer. So what's the difference between the 5% who have the gene and get cancer and the other 95%? It's how you methylate.
Yeah. I think we also have to realize on this subject is that like our genome doesn't change that fast. It's
No.
really the expression of those genes, right? And I think sometimes we just want like oh, this is what it is and I can't change it. But really, it's not a bad thing to do like genetic testing or things like that. I think there's definitely a place for it, but I think more so what we're talking about is the real issue. Um, and but truly it's your genes aren't the root cause. It's really how you are expressing them. So hopefully that makes sense from that standpoint as far as why we're saying it's more of a false root cause than anything.
But
Um,
with that said, let me just say this. They have shown
sure.
study in epigenetics that it matters how your grandmother ate, how your genes will be expressed. So in
Right.
that sense, I get that,
Hmm.
you know, there is a genetic predisposition.
Sure.
However, it's still the expression. It's not the actual presence of which genes.
Right. Yeah, agree. So we'll leave it there. We know that
Yep,
there's probably more, but you
lots
can dig
more.
into these things yourself. I think that's great just to kind of share bits of information, and then there's way more information you could go look at as with each one of these things that we're speaking of. Um, we sort of mentioned gut health. I know in this conversation of like false root causes and that this is sort of one that could be considered a false cause, maybe could not be. It's sort of this area that yes, it matters a lot, but there are things that influence gut health greatly that would be more of a root cause. And so if you're kind of wondering where that one fits in, we're definitely going to talk about it in upcoming episodes in some of the real barriers to healing. And so stay tuned for that. I'm excited to dig into these with you guys. But the last one that we sort of wanted to dig into today is adrenal health. And adrenal health is just hugely important for really a lot of what we've already talked about, right? I mean, it's so connected with thyroid. I mean, it affects hormones. If your adrenals are constantly running on overdrive, you're going to decrease minerals and run through those quicker, which affects how your genes are expressed. So this is definitely something that is it it's hugely important. However, I think when we're talking about it being a false root cause, you have to think about what is driving the adrenals to just be on overdrive and to basically get burnt out. That's more so how we want you to think about it. Because if you just constantly, pound the adrenals with support, you're not really addressing the root of the cause. Not that that would be a bad thing to do. However, we don't want we don't want you to constantly feel like you're just trying to keep up with all these things. You're not really getting to the root cause if you constantly feel like you're playing catch up and you're kind of running on a hamster wheel. That's what some of these things can make you feel like you're doing. And so that's why we really wanted to shed light on it.
Yeah, it's about, the what's the stress
Yeah.
on that gland? What's the thorn in the gland, right?
Hmm.
So, and there's
Yeah.
multiple. There's usually not just one.
Right.
There's several. There's, emotional, physical stressors, there's biological stressors. So, while the adrenals not working, or we should say more accurately, even the stress response. So it's often referred to as the HPA axis or hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. That is our stress response. It's now that is what we could look at as chronically being activated. And I think when we say adrenals, that's really what we mean is the stress
Yeah.
response, the adrenals being activated over and over again through a stress response. And that
Right.
happens many ways. Chronic infection will cause that.
Mhm.
Very often we'll see blood sugar high on blood labs with chronic infections, and that's because the body's in a stress response.
Right.
So to combat pathogens, obviously emotional stress, that's probably the one we think of the most.
Yeah.
Emotional mind stress, our mind running constantly, financial worries, kids worries, work worries. Those are something that will, again, use that HPA, activate that HPA axis. Our mind, our mindset is
Yeah.
super important to our nervous system and how we respond.
For
But
sure.
also, the big thing is the diet for the adrenals too. Everybody's
Mhm.
scared away from cholesterol, right? Cholesterol's bad. It's the bad guy.
Yeah.
We want less cholesterol. And LDL is terrible. It's not good for you. We want it to be as low as possible. LDL is how we shuttle cholesterol to the tissue to make hormones. So we
Mhm.
need it. It's really
Yeah.
important. It's how we cope. And a lot of times you'll see that cholesterol will go up or LDL will go up because people are in a stress response. It's called
Mhm.
compensatory physiology. The body is compensating to allow to make more stress hormones or maybe sex hormones in this case.
Yeah.
Um, because constant running of the cortisol, which is released from your adrenal glands, will
Mhm.
cause a decrease in your sex hormones because there's a concept called pregnenolone steal. So pregnenolone is made from cholesterol, and then the body can shunt it two ways: either sex hormones like progesterone and estrogen, or
Mhm.
down the stress hormone pathway to make DHEA, cortisol to help you
Cortisol.
handle stress.
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of times you'll see people with low progesterone, or what we call estrogen dominance, and they'll want to use bioidenticals to give more progesterone when really the root of the problem is decreasing cortisol and managing the nervous system and stress.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say really focus on physical and emotional stressors if you feel like your adrenals are constantly not where they should be. If you've done an adrenal stress index,
Mhm.
and you have hormones that are too high or too low, really that's, the adrenals aren't the root.
Yeah, and that's what we're excited to dig into. Like what is driving the stress response? That's a lot of the upcoming episodes are going to be about different things that drive the stress response that are actually the barrier to healing. So we're excited about this series. We talk a lot about these things with clients, and I'm excited to dig into them. So hopefully they can be understood more, and that you can really start the healing process by removing some of these barriers. And some of them are easier to remove than others, right? For
Yeah.
sure.
Yes.
But we're excited to just to shed some light on it so that you can really discern, ask the Lord to guide you and like what are your barriers to healing, um and we would love to work with you on these if that's something that you feel like would be a good fit. So you can always check out the services that we offer on our website. We'll make sure that's in the episode show notes. And yeah, thanks for joining
Yeah.
us. We're excited
Yeah, or
about
take our
this.
quiz. I just want to say take our
Yeah,
quiz. If you do think it's thyroid or adrenal, and you're trying to figure out,
yeah,
it's a good place to just get started, but don't
for
stop there.
sure. Yes, that's perfect way to end it. It's a good place to start, but don't stop there.
Right.
So we'll see you on the next episode.